If you want to talk about manufacturers dominating the Dakar, there are three big names that stand out. One is Mitsubishi in cars. The other one, which up until recent events really had no competition, is Kamaz in trucks. And yet, in my opinion, the most impressive one has to be KTM.
19 overall wins from the start of the millennium, 20 if you count gas. To give you an idea, if you add up all the wins of Honda, Yamaha and Cagiva, you're still going to be one short of the Austrians.
And if you look at stage wins, you have to look at Honda, Cagiva, BMW, Husqvarna and Hero combined. And only then you get to match the amount of stage wins gathered by KTM. There have been multiple notable motorcycles produced by the Piro Group for this legendary race, and within them, one stands above the rest. In fact, it is the most dominant vehicle in Dakar's history, the KTM 450 Rally.
This is the story of how the 450 Rally came to be, of what this bike actually is, of the fights it had to go through.
But not many people know, the origins of this motorcycle actually started with controversy. When KTM announced they were quitting the Dakar Rally for good. But look, the 450 didn't just come out of the blue. In fact, it is the result of years and years of KTM giving their all in an attempt to become the kings of Dakar. In the beginning, they tried multiple times to reach glory with riders like Heinz Kinnegartner or Jordi Alcarons.
Well, it's almost become something of a habit, the 7th stage win for Kinnegartner in 1995.
But their real path to success was found together with the release of the KTM 690 Rally. Back then, the Austrians really put everything they had behind this project.
And that was their key advantage. In reality, they were kind of the only ones willing to invest that much in a bespoke rally project.
And they started to win Dakar after Dakar. And when they transitioned to the 690 platform, they just kept on winning and winning and winning again. At that point, if you were a KTM rider, you were basically on the best machine for the job. But any rider who wasn't had a bit of a pre-start handicap. And that's mostly because most other manufacturers weren't making bikes with engines much bigger than 450cc. The other machines were mostly based on regular 450 enduro or motocross bikes. They weren't built with one scope in mind. And that started to annoy some people, and in the late 2000s, a petition allegedly started by David Casteau and Chaleco started floating around the paddock at the Tunisia Rally. It was a petition to the FIM to cap the engine size of all motorcycles in international rallies to 450cc. In order to understand the gravity of what was going to happen, we have to look at the state of the paddock in those times.
For the 2009 Dakar Rally, 225 motorcycles lined up at the start. Of those, exactly half were KTMs, most of them being 500cc or bigger. Of those, 77 were 660 or 690 models. It wasn't just the factory teams, but a lot of the privateers were basing their efforts on KTM's machines.
ASO, the association behind the organization of the Dakar Rally, put out a press release stating that from 2010, all motorcycles with engine capacities over 450cc would be banned. The real problem here, all competitors, both factory and privateers, had just 6 months to adapt to this rule. Look, preparing for the Dakar takes at least a year for most people.
Changing bikes 6 months before is crazy. For factories, sure, but for privateers, it's like motorsport suicide.
Just 1 day later, KTM comes out with a press release in response to ASO. In a nutshell, they announced that, effective immediately, the Austrians were withdrawing from the Dakar Rally, quoting the time span given to be way too small to comply. And as a fan, I agree. 6 months to develop a whole new bike on a completely different engine? That's just beyond unreasonable. According to KTM, this decision had one single purpose: to end the domination of their 690 platform. I mean, indeed, they were the only ones that invested in all the R&D to build a bike like the 690 Rally, and they were profiting from those investments. But with this rule, according to many, ASO wanted to end this era of domination and to invite more of the Japanese manufacturers to take part, since they already had 450 platforms and didn't need to invest as much as KTM had done previously.
But KTM wasn't having it and announced that they wouldn't just be quitting that year's Dakar, they would be quitting Dakar for good, because they were feeling betrayed by the rally organization. And look, they had some sound reasons to do so.
The problem was, at that moment in time, KTM had all production ready to go for their own factory bikes, but they also had everything ready to go for 50 privateer customers who were all relying on using their 690 platform. They were in this unique position, and let's be fair, Dakar screwed them big time.
A few days later, after this shocking announcement, ASO took a step back, announcing that the new 450 regulations would actually only affect the factory riders, and privateers were allowed to run their 690s but with an added restrictor plate,
to bring their performance more in line with their smaller thumpers. Hearing this, the Austrians did decide to send their support trucks to Dakar after all, thereby helping out all their privateer customers. A bit later, ASO takes another step back, releasing an official list of elite pilots who would have to use restrictor plates. Basically, the amateurs were free to run their 690s as they were for another year.
At that point, KTM still decided not to take part officially. So technically, in 2010, there was no factory KTM. But that didn't stop their factory riders from competing.
The clear thing is, Mark and me, we have experience, and we don't have any restrictor on our experience. We don't have any restrictor on our physical training. We don't have any restrictor on the tactic, the strategy.
Cyril Desprez and Marc Comas both started testing restricted 690s, and they were going to go to Dakar with their own teams, backed by corporate sponsors like Red Bull and Repsol. The two top dogs were still going to fight it out on KTMs. Funny fact, actually, when ASO first released the list of elite pilots, somehow Cyril wasn't on there. But the Frenchman knew better and started riding the restricted bikes, expecting to be added to that list later. And sure, just a month afterwards, when the list was finally defined and closed, his name popped up too.
The last years, the race is between Cyril and me, no? Normally. Yeah. And if we look behind, we can say that one year is Cyril, another year is me, and
2010 saw, to no one's surprise, Marc Comas and Cyril Desprez battling for the top spot. Desprez was leading, but Marc was catching up.
Just when you thought that the 450 ban was the biggest controversy of that era, we get another one. Marc was slapped with 2 penalties. A 22-minute one for speeding in a village, which, fair enough.
And a 6-hour one for allegedly illegally swapping a tire mid-track on stage 7. I'm saying allegedly because there was no hard evidence on this.
The Spaniard would have been able to put up more of a fight if it wasn't for mechanical problems in the first week and a tad bit of cheating in stage 7. On the road to Antofagasta, one of his tyres was wearing out dangerously. He therefore stopped behind a house to change it.
The Dakar's organizers noticed Marc had stopped behind a house in a village and confirmed his location and time spent there on a map. It was about the exact time needed to swap a wheel. Also, from looking at pictures, they noticed that Marc's rear tire looked fresh at the end of the stage. A little too fresh, and they argued that it was impossible for a rear wheel to look like that after all those kilometers.
While Comas was pleading his innocence, Desprez kept on going and looked set for an easy-going second week.
On the other hand, Marc Comas denied all allegations, saying that there was no real hard proof of anything like that, which I get too.
Ultimately, did Marc cheat on stage 7? Guess we'll never know for sure. What we do know is that in 2010, the Prey won the rally on a restricted 690, followed by another KTM rider, with Aprilia coming in third place.
But back to the 450. In 2011, Heinz Kinnegartner, the man who started KTM's Dakar project in the first place, said that this rule change was going to negatively impact all privateers,
making the bikes more expensive because of the extra R&D required to make the 450s work. And let me remind you, the whole point of this decision was to make things more approachable, to invite the other manufacturers in. And most importantly, it was meant to end KTM's domination.
And well, I think it's safe to say this decision backfired massively. Because this new set of rules gave birth to the rally's most dominant motorcycle ever, the 450 Rally. At the end of the day, what the Dakar organizers failed to see was that, sure, the 690 engine gave the Austrians an advantage, but their real advantage lied in their knowledge. With the 660 and 690, they developed a platform, not just an engine. And that gave them a big head start into the 450 era, an era they were going to dominate and obliterate the competition.
The 450 Rally is, in a way, an engineering marvel, a purpose-built machine, one meant to tame the Dakar Rally. But what makes this so special, so different to the other offerings from other manufacturers?
To preface this, changes were made along the years ever since its release, but more or less, these features apply to the entire 450 platform. First big differentiator was the starting baseline. Against what most folks would think, this is not based on an EXC or SX. They built a bespoke platform, unlike anything else they were offering. And it all starts at the frame, sporting a trellis design, more alike to KTM's straight and adventure models than to their dirt bikes. The reason is, this chassis, after long testing days, proved to be the most stable one at higher speeds. Adding to that stability is a lengthened swing arm. This does compromise in its cornering ability, but as Toby Price once said,
I would rather crash in a corner where I'm doing 30, 40, 50 kilometers an hour than crash at 120, 30, 40, 50 kilometers an hour. So that for me just adds a little bit more stability.
Couple this with 52mm top-of-the-line column valve forks and shock, and you get a motorcycle that floats around at high speeds and can keep that speed for days on end.
Then you have the engine, which started its life as a unit derived from their motocross bikes. Now, this engine did get some bespoke trick components, but actually, over the years, it migrated to resemble the power unit of an enduro bike more than that of a motocross one. Its oil capacity increased to 1.9 liters instead of the standard 1.2, and with that, the bikes were also gifted a dedicated oil cooler.
They used the hardened version of the Pankel transmission to add to the durability. In the end, these units ended up outputting around 74 to 75 horsepower, which is impressive for a single-cylinder 450.
And it's even more impressive when you consider that this engine has to sustain that power non-stop at high revs for over 10,000 kilometers without any rebuild. They also used to run one big radiator, but for the latest version, KTM did switch to an EXC-style split radiator design. We've covered the essentials, sure, but to me, here is where the interesting features start. Look at the skid plate. It's one solid unit made out of carbon fiber meant to protect both the engine and frame, but also the side fuel pods. And that's not it, because this unit also has a dedicated compartment for a toolbox.
Since allegedly the Dakar rules state that riders aren't allowed to carry tools on their bodies. And that's not it, because the skid plate used to also incorporate an emergency 3-liter water tank.
Where we had the bladder and where pretty much everyone has the water bladder, it's right under the engine, it's quite hot. So I don't bags drinking that straight in the sand dunes if the bike's broken and stopped in the dunes. But maybe take a few tea bags out there and dunk in there and you'll be good to go.
Yeah, this was an FIM regulation, but from what I read, they took out that rule since.
The rules, we don't have to carry 3 litres on the bike no more. So,
And speaking of carbon fiber, the navigation tower is of course made out of it, aiming to be as light as possible towards the top part of the motorcycle. And that is still not everything. You see, the Dakar has a generic speed limit of 160 km per hour for motorcycles. But any rally will have extra speed limits marked on the roadbook, and ignoring those incurs big time penalties. So the KTM 450 Rally got not one, but 2 different types of speed limiters. One is a simple, generic 160 kph limiter, meant for the flat open tracks. But the second system is selectable by the rider, and depending on the gear the bike is in, it will limit its speed at certain common levels, like 30 kph in first, 50 kph in second, and so on. Every gear up to 5th with this limiter engaged has one level of speed limit that it can tackle.
And then, in order to go that far, you need to carry a load of fuel. So the 450 Rally has a total of 3 tanks.
2 on the front sides, dripping down for improved weight distribution, and 1 bigger tank in the rear. And this rear tank actually serves the bike's subframe too. It's a structural part of the motorcycle in a way.
But the clever bits regarding the fuel are not over. You see, there are 2 fuel pumps, and for 2 different reasons.
If one pump fails, you can always rely on the other and transfer the fuel in the tank that still works. But more commonly, these bikes have a switch allowing the rider to choose which part of the gas to consume.
And then we've got a tank switch here where we can swap between the front and the rear tanks.
So, if you're in the dunes and you want a light front end, you can drain that front tank first.
I normally like to drain the rear tank first, so I keep it switched over to the rear tank just to get a bit of that weight out the back end to stop it swapping around.
But if you're in a technical, twisty section, then you'd want to drain the rear first.
At some stages I'll leave a little bit in there if it's sandy or whatever. I want to kind of squat the back down a bit to keep the weight off the front, but normally I drain it all out.
And all this can be done on the go. It's actually a super clever system. And yet, possibly the best engineering feat of this motorcycle is actually not that visible. It's how easy it was designed to be serviced, both by crews, but most importantly, by riders.
For example, taking one of the front tanks off requires 3 screws. Taking the entire skid plate out, that's just 2 screws. Even compared to my bare bones 450 EXC, the rally models are on a different level when it comes to how accessible they are to work on.
And you can clearly see it's not by mistake. They had to think about and design all of these little improvements that, at the end of the day, add up to one truly dominant machine.
How dominant, you might ask? Well, for reference, between 2011 and 2019, the 450 Rally won every single Dakar title, and then won a few more. In 2011, the first generation of this machine came out, and it was, more or less, a 450 engine bolted inside the old 690 frame. And KTM did the 1-2 with Cyril Dupre and Marc Comas, 1 hour and 40 minutes ahead of the next manufacturer in 3rd place. 2012 brought a new model of the 450 Rally, and that brought KTM another 1-2 finish featuring the same riders. And while that's impressive, what's even more impressive, 8 out of the top 10 bikes were orange-blooded. 2014 brought with it a big update. The entire package was trimmed down, made slimmer, lighter, more agile in general. They catered to the 450 engine better, and Marc Comas was a big influence in developing this new motorcycle. And that same year, he also won the rally, with another KTM 1-2, bringing a 2-hour lead on the next manufacturer. And later, in 2016, 17 and 19, KTM managed to monopolize the entire podium with their machines. But then, 2020 came around, and this brought a big update to their rally bike, and actually created one of the most loved generations of the 450 Rally. They updated the swing arm, linkage, shock, exhaust, airbox, tanks, seat, basically everything. And so, in 2020, KTM lost. Yeah, that year, Honda got the title with the help of Ricky Brabec. He stopped KTM's domination. At last. You see, the Dakar evolved. What was needed to win it 20 years ago is nowhere near the same as what's needed today. To quote Sam Sunderland, "Now from the first kilometer it is full gas and 100% every minute until someone makes a mistake." It's no longer a marathon for the top guys. It's a daily sprint.
And Honda's approach of building a huge team of riders actually made a ton of sense back then, but leave a comment below if you want us to cover how the Japanese manufacturer managed to stomp on KTM's parade.
You'd think this success, or loss, depending how you look at it, would mark the end of the KTM 450 Rally's era. Except, in 2022, Sam Sunderland got the victory on a gas factory bike, which realistically is just a red KTM 450 Rally. And then, in 2023, the battle got tight, really tight. In the end, Kevin Benavides managed to snatch victory. Over 8,000 kilometers of racing, over 48 hours of riding to his limit, he managed to get the trophy by just 43 seconds. Now, to give you an idea of how short that is, this entire video went black and white exactly 43 seconds ago. That was it. Okay, to be fair, the runner-up was Toby Price, also on a KTM. 2025 brought us a new incarnation of the 450 Rally Replica, which is the one available for privateers. The factory guys have been running this for some time, but this latest update changed the engine, gearbox, bodywork and chassis. But at its core, it's still a KTM 450 Rally.
One thing that's important to realize. Yes, these days all factory bikes are pretty much bespoke machines, made specifically for rally. But it didn't used to be this way.
For example, according to an older Brake magazine article, the Yamaha WR450F of the past, which was one of the main contenders to KTM's crown, even the factory bike was still based on a standard WR chassis. Sure, they reinforced it, added stuff to it, all that jazz, but compared to the effort KTM had put in, it almost feels like an amateur job. And still, the impact this KTM had on the rallying world goes way beyond the multitude of podiums. And arguably, in a way, I'd say it shaped the way the Dakar paddock looks today. Introducing the Rally Replica, a bike that KTM sells annually in limited quantities up to 100 to privateers that want to race the desert.
In a nutshell, this is a factory 450 rally bike with a few changes. But selling the bike is one thing, the other more important one is the support KTM gives to these privateers. You see, by buying a Rally Replica, a Dakar rider gains access to the entire KTM parts truck.
What that means is that any spare part you might ever need will be there. And when you're paying tens, hundreds of thousands of euros to try and conquer the Dakar, that's a huge advantage. Not having one part for your bespoke Yamaha can throw all that effort away, but if you're on a Rally Replica, you can buy anything. And that's why, if you look at the stats, on average in the past few years, around 70% of Male Moto riders rode KTMs.
Now, okay, obviously KTM will never sell you the exact bike that their top rider goes on that year. That's how factory projects work. So the Rally Replica has some changes to it, and is often 1 or more years behind the official riders' bikes.
With that being said, when you look at the differences between the replicas and the factory machines, there's not that much in it. Like, the replicas get 48mm forks instead of 52, but still from the top of the line cone valve series. Replicas get 4 or 5 less horsepower, and I mean, that's kind of it. Tell this to a motocross guy and you'll probably blow his mind. In fact, this is the only motorcycle available to the public that's assembled in KTM's motorsports building, outside of the regular factories.
Now, okay, let's come back to reality. This will cost you an arm and a leg. In the past, prices started at around 26,000 euros without tax, but from what I heard, those days are kind of long gone, going well over 30 nowadays.
And sure, for an off-road motorcycle, that's a lot. But at the same time, is it? I mean, you're basically buying a racing prototype for just a little more than a top-of-the-line GS.
I'm a bit conflicted actually. On one hand, it's a ton of money for a dirt bike, but on the other, it's not that much when you consider what it is. Still, for me and most people, this is the closest we'll get to owning a rally replica. Link in the description.
Anyway, let's say you got the money and KTM agreed to sell you one. Great, you're on your way. I just hope you have the money put aside for spare parts and maintenance, because depending on the issue, it might get pricey. Quickly. For example, a new piston is 1,351 euro. A skid plate? They'll set you back a nice 942. Do you want to upgrade your forks or shock? That's priceless.
Seriously, KTM might sell you those items, but they don't actually list a price for them. You broke something on your swing arm.
That's another 1,181 euro. And to put that back, you will need this pivot axle thingy, and that's 116. Add a new windshield for 159, two side plastics for 228.
Each? The tower is a nice, soothing 1,630.
And that's just for the structure of the tower, with no lights, brackets or anything. If you do want the lights though, that will be another 185 euro each. For reference, just these items that I mentioned earlier are worth as much as a brand new CF Moto 450 MT. Yes, that's a cheap adventure bike, but also that's a complete motorcycle, running and driving, not just a box of parts.
That being said, you do pay a premium, but you also get the most premium materials and items in return. These motorcycles are made to last, to endure the desert, to not skip a beat.
The amount of abuse they can take is honestly pretty astonishing, especially when you add in the performance they can output. Look, KTM managed to get 18 consecutive wins between 2001 and 2019. Their 450 Rally is a product of decades of engineering, research and investment. They constantly poached up-and-coming riders, or people from other teams like Sam Sunderland or Kevin Benavides. We can look at the 450 Rally and see the reasons for domination in multiple places.
But at the end of the day, you can't deny that for more than 2 decades, KTM have been by far the most devoted to the sport.
They were willing to invest in the Dakar at a time when no one else was. And when you look at it that way, is it really a surprise they also managed to create the most dominant motorcycle of all time?
I don't think it is.